within a river that you're dealing with here. Now here's another example. Take it more extreme. Cross a Canadian female. That little thing that I showed you that's 12 centimeters long, take it and cross it with a nice big Scottish male and see what happens, and take a nice big Scottish female and cross it with one of these rinky-dink Canadian males. And not surprisingly, the Canadian females have small egg sizes. But if you cross a Canadian female with a Canadian male, you get this egg size here. If you cross a Canadian female with a Scottish male, you get a much smaller egg. Now that's the same egg you started out with, but you put a different sperm into it. And that's the impact. Now, I find that absolutely amazing. What's the relevance of that to fitness? We don't even start to understand what that might do. And yet they're introducing North American Atlantic salmon into the aquaculture industry in many locations, and have done in the past. This requires thinking about what the implications of these things might be. Interestingly, if you take Scottish females and you cross them with Canadian males, there's no difference in the egg size. So it works one way but not the other. Now, what are the genetic mechanisms? We're only starting to understand that 8 billion base pair genome and its relevance to survival and fitness. Now, here's another example. Take the same crosses and you look at survival. Well, you cross Scottish with Canadian, you get the first generation hybrids. Survive, no problem at all. But then you back cross the early maturing males here to the Scottish or to the Canadian females and look at survival. And what do you get? Well, one way you cross it, you get 100% survival, or virtually 100% survival. The other way you get virtually 100% mortality. What's going on? Why is this asymmetry going on? Again, it just illustrates how little we understand about the genetics of these species. So if you look at this thing about the difference between the oikel and the shin, well, they've been stocking shin fish into the oikel for ages. They've stopped in recent years. But what are the implications of this population mixing, as Andy has gone into? You're going to lose the fitness of your population. And this is, you have to remember that this is one characteristic of the overall fitness of salmon in their rivers. And all these things contribute to it. And so this really just is opening the door on what is actually going on. So if you're introducing fish from culture or non-native fish into the other river, you might do it for all sorts of reasons. For restoring, enhancing, reestablishing, supplementing. Everybody's got all sorts of reasons that they use for it. But you really have to think about what you're doing. That's the point the other people have made. Now I'm just going to illustrate this with an example of if you want to enhance spring fish. In most places, spring fish are really what everybody wants to catch, and yet they're declining. And everybody would like to stock in order to increase spring fish, just like you want to stock to increase sea trout. So, how easy is it? Well, you need to know why there are less spring fish. What's the bottleneck? Get rid of it, as the other speaker said. If you don't know what it is, you can do whatever you want. It isn't going to deal with the problem necessarily. So, has the habitat or the carrying capacity of the habitat for spring salmon populations been reduced? Well, you need to look at that. We do know that spring salmon come from different breeding populations than do late-run salmon. So you need to do things on this population-specific basis and investigate it that way. Have there been environmental changes? As we know, a lot of these traits are genotype-environment interactions. You cannot look at just genetics. You cannot look at just environment. You have to look at how these two are interacting as regards to the issue. Has the natural fitness of the spring salmon in the sea or in the freshwater changed? If it's happening in the marine environment, what can you do about it? Well, it's certainly going to be an awful lot different than if it's happening in freshwater. And so your whole strategy is going to be different. So you've got to really answer that question. If the cause of the decline can be reversed, then stocking of native spring fish may be able to be used to increase numbers of spring fish. You can use it in that supportive breeding approach, but only if you've got rid of that bottleneck and you really know what the source of the problem is. And the factors you need to consider when you're doing that are various, and they're not easy necessarily to deal with. There's variation in run timing is influenced by both genetic and environmental factors. There's genetic differences between populations. What's driving it in one population and another population may be very different. There's variation within populations, as Andy said, that variation you get in Atlantic salmon populations, you'll get grills and multi-sea winter fish. We know that's both genetically and environmentally determined. If you just take one component of the population and you try and breed from that, you may have problems, so you've got to think about that carefully. Hybridization will affect run timing of offspring. If you hybridize early and late running fish, is that a good thing? If you take all your brood stock at the back of the season, are you getting early running fish and late running fish, or are you getting both of them and crossing them? And what's the consequences of that? Change in the environment may affect the timing of the offspring show. So if your environment's changed, it still may not breed true. And in particular, if you put it in a hatchery, that may affect what's going on. We don't understand the genetics of what's offspring early running and late running. So we've really got a problem there. We find it very difficult to advise as to what to do. So again, a precautionary approach perhaps, because we may cause more problems if we just do any old thing. And the other thing is this thing about breeding true. Well, in many cases things breed true. It's also true that things don't breed true. What superficially, phenotypically, as Andy said, one form or another form isn't necessarily what you're going to get if you cross two individuals. So I always use the example of my wife's got dark hair. She's sitting in the audience there. I've got no hair now, but I used to have blonde hair. And our third son has got red hair. Well, there was no true breeding there, and I believe my wife, so... But if we both look back into our ancestry, I've got an aunt, I've got an uncle who's had red hair, and Bridget's got, on one side of her family, there's some red hair as well. And what we've had is these genes percolating through and then just coming together in a particular combination. It just shows you these things can be more complicated than they appear on the surface in many cases. So before you do stocking, be smart on your management objectives. Make sure you know what you're doing. Understand population structuring. Understand the underlying factors controlling and limiting the abundance. What's your problem? Establish what type of interventions, if any, are possible and practical to achieve. Because you may have to accept there's nothing you can do, or if you do find the real problem, focus on that. Choose stocking interventions which have a scientifically demonstrable expectation of success. A lot of people think science is a dirty word, but it's no more than evidence-based consideration. Make sure you have evidence that it actually, the whole thing, makes logical sense. And have a plan to monitor the success of stocking. If you don't monitor it, how will you learn anything? You've got to learn from what you do, because obviously we don't know an awful lot. And every time you do something, if you monitor it in a scientific way that allows you to increase your understanding, then we've all gained. So, is stocking a panacea, Pandora's box, or is it neither? It's neither, really. But it's more of a Pandora's box than a panacea. The final comment, ecology isn't rocket science. It's much harder. and then add genetics. So anyway, a little bit of a, if you're interested in these things, this is a book that I edited along with Lee Stradmeyer and Jennifer Nielsen, and Andy's contributed heavily to this book as well. I'm not getting royalties, so I'm not pushing this to make money, but if you are interested in genetics conservation and management, then this book has been written for non-geneticists, for people like yourself here. It's got lots of pictures, 200, and you can just read it in bites and whatnot. And so if you want to read up a bit on genetics and that, I'd recommend you to read it. Thank you very much.